Good evening for the third time. My name is Arushi and I work as an analyst at YLAC. I hope all of you had a very refreshing tea break. And I know we've had some extremely interesting and engaging conversations since morning. And I would like to welcome you to our third and last panel for the day, Setting Narratives for Gender Equality, Men as Allies. And I'll now take a moment to introduce our very esteemed guests. So first we have Mr. Krishna Allavaru, who is the Joint Secretary of the All India Congress Committee and the National in charge of the Indian Youth Congress. He is a lawyer by profession with an LLM from Georgetown University. He has been associated with student politics since his days at the Delhi University. He spearheads the organization on all fronts, be it taking on the government on various issues or conducting outreach programs in different parts of the country. Dilip Cherian is a renowned Indian communications expert, political campaign advisor, and founder of Perfect Relations, South Asia's leading image management and public affairs consultancy. Often referred to as India's image guru, he is celebrated for his expertise in strategic communication, reputation management, and public relations. With a career spanning decades, he has worked with high-profile clients across industries, building influential narratives. Nikhil Taneja is a Mumbai-based entrepreneur, writer, producer, storyteller, teacher, public speaker, and mental health advocate. He is the co-founder and CEO of Yuva, a purpose-driven youth media, research, and impact organization that works on creating socially conscious content and starting meaningful conversations among the Indian youth. He is also the creator and host of Be a Man Yaar. Mr. Ritesh Pandey is an Indian politician and former member of parliament from Ambedkar Nagar, Uttar Pradesh. Initially a member of the Bahujan Samaj Party, he joined the BJP in February of 2024. He founded Takshila Academy, a leading K-12 institution in Ambedkar Nagar, and Awadh Mutineers Football Club, offering underprivileged children the opportunity to play competitive football and study on full scholarships. Finally, we have Rohit Kumar, who would be moderating the panel. Rohit co-founded YLAC in 2016 and TQH Consulting in 2017 to enhance India's governance ecosystem through public policy research, advocacy, and citizen engagement. He is an alumnus of Harvard Kennedy School and IIT Bombay. He has expertise in tech policy, digital infrastructure, and regulatory frameworks. Previously, he was the head of policy and research for MP Jay Panda and worked at PRS Legislative Research, where he developed the widely used MP Track tool. He is also a former strategy consultant at BCG and a 2013 fellow with the Asia Society. Right, handing it over to Rohit.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us here today for this panel discussion. I think I have the distinct honor of perhaps being the first man holding the mic in this particular conference. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I think, let me just set a little bit of context before I hand it over to the panelists. So I was raised by a single mother, and I think all my life I have been surrounded by very strong women. So I do see myself as a very strong advocate for gender equality. And as an ally for gender equality, and I am very happy today to be surrounded by 4 other men on this particular panel who are perhaps equally passionate allies. And you know, before we get into the discussion, I think I wanted to just say that when we sometimes think of gender equality, we see it as women standing up for their rights, you know, trying to break the glass ceiling, standing up against the world. What if that construct was enhanced or changed with men sort of stepping into the picture, and not just in the background, but as active allies that are perhaps taking a hammer and shattering that ceiling for the women also. So what would that do? So I think that is what we wanted to sort of discuss today. And I believe that the question that we wanted to answer is that what kind of a role does allyship play? And how can men support women's voices without hijacking the narrative? And what can we do to take this conversation just out of hashtags into actual actionable action that we see on the ground, right? So with that, let me actually begin. I wanted to first begin by coming to Nikhil. Nikhil is a storyteller. I think I was just telling him, I was first introduced to him in, I think, 2018 perhaps, when he had come to a fellowship that Vilac runs with young teenagers on how they use art for advocacy. And Nikhil was talking to that particular cohort about storytelling. And I walked out of that session and I was like, oh my God, who is this guy? Because I think I've never met somebody who does better storytelling. And your series, most recent production, Be a Man, that talks about masculinity and getting men to talk about gender equality is phenomenal. So I wanted to come to you first and ask, what, according to you, why should men be involved in this particular conversation, and what role can tools like storytelling play in this conversation?
Thank you so much, Rohit, for such a kind introduction. You should have said no pressure at the end of it. But, you started with something so personal by talking about your mother, I think. And I, not at all to say that, not in the context of, how you must have been raised, but I feel like most mothers in our country are single mothers, right? In that sense.
Yeah.
Like, because the fathers are typically not at home, they're outside, mothers raising our children on their own. And I've seen that in my own life. I've seen my father, he was also a really amazing, wonderful person. Never been around when I was growing up because he was always working, always out trying to earn for us, because that was the understanding he had growing up, that he has to be the provider while my mother has to be the nurturer. And I missed out on that nurturing from my father. At the same time, as my mother's, as we have aged, I sometimes have conversations with my mother where I find out that she was once, like very recently I found out, can you imagine, like I'm 38 right now, I've known her for 38 years of my life, and I found out just recently that she was long jump champion in college, and she played district level, and she was supposed to go for an international tour but couldn't go because her parents did not want a woman to go. And I'm coming to personal because I really feel like it is, and you spoke about stories, it is these stories that we see in front of us sometimes, we live through in front of us, that where we don't recognize that these are narratives that we have built around us, that have been given to us, that we have believed. That we just, when we are told that men have to be providers and women have to be nurturers, we believe it. And because we believe it, and we have believed it as a word for a very long time, neither do women get the opportunity, and now they are, of course, unfortunately in a certain socioeconomic part of our country, women are getting more opportunities, and they're taking those opportunities, creating those opportunities. At the same time, we don't even have that conversation where men also get to be nurturers, so that conversation though we shuru bhi nahi hui hai. Why can't men, like, you would find it so odd that a man sitting at home while the woman is working. That's still not a concept, that is a too radical a concept for someone to imagine at this point of time. So I've seen that at home, I've seen that in the society around me. When we talk about male allyship, I think the first thing that we need to understand are, what, as men, what are we doing to be allies to our families, to our mothers, to our sisters, to our friends, to our partners, and understand it all starts with empathy, right? It all starts with understanding the pain of the people that you live with, and the love that you have for them, and seeing them as people and not as genders. But to first see them as people, you need to understand the burden of gender that all of us carry on us. And that's one of the things that I've realized in my life. Like, it's so interesting. Like, this is one of the, I don't do panels with only men on it. Like, this is the first I'm doing in, like, I think maybe 10 years or so. If I must have done something before that, I don't know. But at least for the last decade, I've not done it. And the only reason I'm doing it is because this conference has been made by women, and men are talking about being allies. That's the only reason. Otherwise, like, anytime I get a invite to say that join us, and there's men.
It's a manel, right?
It's a manel, exactly. So I respond saying, here are 10 women that you can call instead of me, because you've only got men over here.
You're putting in hot seat.
Yeah, no, but
It's by design that
I know exactly. That's what I'm saying, and that's why I did not even respond in that capacity, right? We need to understand in our own lives, how we are. We can talk about, we can create these narratives, we can create policy, we can create shows like I have. But in our own lives, if you're not taking that taking the time as men to understand what the women in our lives are going through, and seeing them as people beyond seeing them as women, And again, like, I give an example. Like, I have understood all of this by being raised by a mother who has been feminist, right? In trying to raise, and one of the things that I realized that where feminism for, I think, is about as much about having raising strong women, but also about having vulnerable and sensitive men. You know, that is very much a part of feminism, and I think that's what my mother did with me. She tried to make sure that I was gentle and I was sensitive and I was kind. And as I grew up, I recognized that, and my first act of, I suppose, sensitivity was recognizing the pain that she's had in her life. And that is why one of the big reasons that if all the work that we do at Yuva, a lot of the work we do at Yuva is with the feminist approach. Be a Man Yaar as a show is that. But as I said, you know, the second part of it is, if you want to create male allies, you need to ensure that, oh, Arish, hi. To create male allies, you need to first look at each other as people versus looking at each other as gender. And in our own lives, first we need to kind of create that space for women to be able to express themselves, to be able to have a point of view, to be able to speak without and actually be heard before just taking up space everywhere possible. And then, I mean, as we go along, we'll talk more, I suppose.
No, great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it reminded me that one of my classmates at the Kennedy School was from Georgia, and she and her husband had flipped those roles of nurturing and caring. She used to work at the World Bank, and he was a stay-at-home dad raising twins. And initially, I was quite shocked by it for a while. It took me a little bit of a while to get used to it. And then, you know, once you get used to it, you're like, you know, it's as normal as it could potentially get. So, Krishna, let me come to you now. I wanted to understand, you've straddled different worlds. You've moved from the corporate to now the political side. Do you see any differences in the narrative on gender norms, gender equality between these two kinds of worlds? And specifically when it comes to politics and also businesses, how do you see differences in allyship? Are there more allies that women have on the business side now as compared to perhaps they find on the political side?
Thanks. I think what is common in my limited experience on the business side and the political side is that there are a lot of men who talk about women's equality or women's inclusion or women's empowerment or giving women more space in leadership positions. On the business side, what I found was that there was a lot more implementation, a lot more action. I'm not saying there was enough, but I'm saying there was much more walking the talk. What I see in the political side is that there's a lot of talk for headlines, for media, for perception, for image building. In my limited experience, and I'm seeing what I'm seeing across the board, I'm not saying one is worse than the other. There's very, very little action in terms of giving women space, giving women leadership positions, making the place more safe, more viable, more welcoming for women. And that's one clear distinction I see. So, I mean, if you align with the Indian male stereotype, a lot of talk, very little action, I think that would describe the Indian political scene when it comes to this particular topic. When I came into politics, it was very, very obvious. There was always a lot of talk about 33% reservation for women in legislators and parliament. But there was very little space for them within the organization, and that doesn't require an act of parliament. I mean, you don't need to pass it. You don't need consensus from a large number of parties. So when I got a chance to work with the Indian Youth Congress in somewhat of a decision-making role, I made this one of my priorities, and my conversation with myself is, don't just talk, try and do something. I mean, you have a lever or a set of levers in your hand. What can you do? So we've been trying a bunch of things, and I'll quickly talk about some of them. I'm not saying that we've broken the ceiling. We're far from it, in fact, but we're trying to make conscious steps. We're trying to take different steps, and some of them have some results. So the first thing that happened when I took over is that we had a problem at one of the highest levels. The person was not very, women didn't feel friendly or welcome around him. And we had to make a decision to change that person, and that's when we first instituted what we called an ICC. This was about roughly 6 years ago. So that committee, which had 2 women and 1 man, and we didn't really follow the Posh Act to the T, we instituted that committee. That committee made a recommendation, and the decision was taken very swiftly to remove that person. Because if you have a problem at the top, you're not going to be able to do anything with the rest of the organization. So we made a change, and then we started a few programs to bring in more women. And then after a couple of years, we instituted 33% women representation at the top level in the IYC, which is the National Committee. And this happened about 4 years ago. And since then, we've been trying to take it down to the state, district, and block levels, and we have been struggling. So what we then realized is that just representation is not good enough unless we bring in more women in the district, blocks, and state, because that builds a pipeline. Otherwise, representation is going to remain representation. It's not going to convert to leadership. And then we started a couple of parallel pipelines, if you will, where women can enter. We tried something called the Super She program, and then Indira Fellows. And both these programs are in their second year of operations. And I think one was meant for people who are interested in the political space directly. The second space was for those who are kind of straddling a political / other professions. And the Indira Fellows was more directed towards real, rural, suburban, low-income women. And that's been working quite well for us in terms of identifying new people at the grassroots and encouraging and giving women more confidence. In addition to that, what we found is that a very rich catchment area is the local body elections. Everything from your sarpanch to your panch, block panchayats, zilla panchayats, councils, corporations. Because fortunately, and this is one of the best things I think that the Indian Parliament has done, is there's a reservation for women. While there is a fair amount of people who are either wives or mothers or daughters, it's amazing that there's a lot of people there who are in their own right leaders, or who may have been a sarpanch or patino, so a wife of a local strong man, or a mother, or a daughter. But once they've been in that role, once they've sat in the chair, once they've quote unquote tasted blood, the power, there's transformation in many different ways. And that's a great pipeline for us. So now I think we have a better pipeline built in for the state, district, and block panchayat, but we're still very far. The other thing I realized is that we, as colleagues, are not very welcoming for women. I mean, sexual harassment is definitely there, and it needs to be addressed, and needs to be addressed promptly. But there's a lot of things before that that make women unwelcome, uncomfortable. And that, we realized, required some training for the men, and we've incorporated gender sensitization trainings into our modules. And we find some very interesting dynamics when we have these conversations. So for example, one of the things that we do is a privilege walk. So that has very visual, very simple impact. For those of you who are familiar with it, that's fine, but I'm going to try and address this shortly for those who are not familiar with it. We have, let's say, 3 men and 3 women standing like this, and they're asked a specific question, which usually relates to, did you feel that your gender was in any way a barrier or an asset? If it's an asset, you take a step forward. If it's a barrier, you take a step back. And we ask 3, 4 questions, and very soon the men are on that side of the room and the women are on this side of the room. And that very visually helps the penny drop. The other thing we ask is we ask women to write anonymous notes about what made them uncomfortable, safe, and we ask the men to read it out. And very often the men are very surprised, shocked, sheepish, ashamed, but it helps people understand that the way I view the world is not the way things are. So these are things that are helping, but we're still scratching the surface. And I think there's a lot that we need to do, and probably in the course of the conversation we can talk a little bit more.
Thank you so much, Krishna. So your example reminded me of an incident that had happened when I was working in an MP's office. So I used to work with the office of Mr. Jayapanda, who's from Odisha, and his constituency is Kendrapada, and we were a team of men and women in his Delhi office who went to support him on his campaigning. And I remember but a lot of the ground stuff that is there is men, that supports the MP in doing all the tours, etc. So I remember one of my colleagues coming and telling me that when you were not there, when I was not there, all the men were sitting in one room in the evening after the tour was done, having a conversation, but they had gotten very comfortable with each other. So somebody was sitting in their banyan, somebody was sitting where, and she found it very uncomfortable to enter that room. And even though she wanted to be a part of the conversation, she had to step back, right? And that sort of alienates you from spaces that you could perhaps otherwise own, and might even help you further your career eventually, right, as you understand more of these things. So I think these are some subtle things where gender sensitization, perhaps the use of language when you're sitting among women will become important. But Riteshji, coming to you, I wanted to, you specifically speak about the intersections, and you say that there cannot be any social justice without the annihilation of caste. And I think you've also, I read an op-ed by you where you had written how specifically in rural areas, caste, class and gender combine together to make it hell for a lot of women. So even as we are talking about gender representation, the more complicated issue is representation and leadership for women from marginalized communities. So what is the additional, what can we really do to improve that? And what role can allyship play there?
Okay, thank you, Rohit. What I would like to begin with first, just adding on to what Krishna has said about Panchayati Raj and how Panchayati Raj has allowed for women to get reservations. So one of the things with caste and gender intersections is that you do have reservation for, let's say, OBC women and Dalit women in the Panchayati Raj. And often that allows for women from marginalized communities to come into power. Further, what we see, again adding on to what Krishna was saying, that you would often, there would often be the local strong man or the person, everybody is fielding their wife, so that, brother's wife or their mother, and then they lead otherwise in their village on their behalf, and only the women go to the meetings and they're assisted there by their husband or their damad or whatever. And but that is also a challenge, a generational challenge. So you have a lot of women that have probably not been exposed, or not probably, they haven't been exposed to public life so much. They haven't been going out and they haven't been interacting with individuals, and mostly they're in parda, or they're only going out with women to work in the field, and often not really aware of various schemes of how to act in public spaces, especially where politics is being discussed or schemes are being discussed. So but that sort of space, when they walk into it and they realize that there is space for women to grow, the next generation that is coming up, you often see that a lot of younger girls are very much interested in taking part in these spaces. So that is one. I've also seen with the intersection, what you also see is that sometimes, class trumps caste when it comes to these things. So often what you will see is, if you're from a particular class, you would be more, because you have a better education background, you are more likely to hold public engagements better, and therefore you get a better response from people in general. And this is where schemes come into place. So, the government would have, lately the latest example is Ladli Behna scheme. But before that, when the BSP was in power, and even now, what you see in UP is that there is reservation in education for women. There were bicycles that were given so that they could go to school. And also what you see is, the sort of first steps is becoming an Anganwadi or becoming an Asha Bahu, and that sort of pulls you out in the public space, and you're working, and you kind of become aware of all the various schemes, and your rights as a worker and as a woman. And then, when I was in Parliament, I had raised issues of Anganwadi workers getting a pay rise or having better work conditions. And that was all coming from their organization. And most of these women were coming from marginalized communities. So there is that intersection that comes through government schemes that allows for women to participate. If you also see now currently with the Nari Bandhan scheme, the act that has come out, the Women Reservation Act, it basically, there is a debate there that within the 33% there should be a reservation for OBC and Dalit communities, and it is widely said that that out of the already reserved seats, the same number or the same percentage is going to be given to these communities. But then again, that is another space that can be discussed and talked about, and maybe in the future, people can see change there. Currently, my party, the BJP, is having its Mandal Adhyaksh. So, a Mandal is basically having about 76 to 80 booths under them. And it's, the party is pushing that in a district where about 25 to 27 mandals are there, there should be, one woman at least. So that's a start. And to further add on to the challenges, I think one of the bigger ones is the generational challenge, and how, of course, the example that you quoted, how to make women more comfortable in these spaces, and that begins with them being better educated, and especially from communities that are marginalized, and having access to public spaces, and being able to go out and be part of movements. Once that starts taking place, I think women in these communities become more aware. And also, if you look at a rural constituency versus a urban constituency, you will see a lot more women participating in urban constituencies, and that is because of the sort of atmosphere that these constituencies, in terms and the acceptance of women to go out and engage in public debate and conversations in public spaces, and be part of movements. So that kind of a thing allows for women to be more participative and also understand how political spheres work, and be able to get attention and feel more part of it and be more accepted. So that, I think, is building up in rural India. And I also think that with time and the new generation that is coming up, we've only had the Panchayati Raj since since the 1990s. At the time, the Mulayam Singh government had implemented this. And And from then to now, a lot has changed, but still, we need to see a lot more women participating and feeling that they are a part of it and not just have their male counterparts becoming their representative. I would also like to add is, one of the things that I noticed when I was an MLA also in UP was that, as women got, as government jobs were reserved for women, or certain seats, let's say, in primary schools or in the police force. Now, lately in UP, there's they're taking in about 50,000 police personnel and 12,000 seats are reserved for women. What you often see is that once, often marriages and alliances are now based on how educated the girl is, whether she's got a B.Ed degree or what classes she's preparing for. And then once those marriage alliances are made, and you often see that the girl gets a job, the roles also reverse within communities where women are working in the house, and they get a job as a teacher. Now the husband, his sole job is to actually drive the teacher from home to school and then school back, and he's picking up the kids and all of these things, and it gives a lot more power to women in such cases. So that's where I think that governments play a big role in bringing caste and gender, both these spaces at par. And as we go on further with this, I'm happy to shed more light.
No, thank you for that. And in fact, I think there is definitely a recognition that economic empowerment has a huge role to play finally in terms of also political empowerment. You start exerting yourself, and I think to the point that Krishna, you were mentioning the Panchayat series that is there, I think on Amazon Prime, perhaps illustrates that very well, that once you get exposure to power, slowly you start asserting yourself and you've tasted blood, so to speak. But let me come to you, Dilip sir, and as the revered image guru and also somebody who is the pioneer of image consulting, I wanted to ask you that is it time for men in power to view allyship also from a PR lens? And and do you think that can enhance, that incentive can get more men to become allies? Or do you risk it becoming tokenism and performative?
Thank you. That's provocative indeed. And also to make sure that all of you stay awake, alive, and alert, let me begin by saying something which I actually believe, but I also recognize is bound to be a little provocative. Power and equality needs to be grabbed. It's not going to be given. If all of you are not going to get up and get it, it ain't happening. So some of it may happen for the wonderful visuals it provides, Instagrammable moments, but remove those filters. You've got to get up there, use both your hands, kick them where it hurts, and grab it. I am not a great believer in allyship. I'm a great believer that the current discrepancy is so huge that this ally business will only delay the business by a much greater time than you and the next generation will be patient for. Remember that compared to all these wonderful gentlemen on this manel, I've been lucky or unlucky that I've had, the first job I got was because this lady prof of mine told her husband in the drawing room of her home in Lutyens, Delhi, that evening after my last exam, that he will start at your office on Monday. Otherwise, this guy will just go downhill. The guy in question, the husband in question, was a secretary to the government of India. He could not hire someone at my salary and my qualifications, but she was Ramanujam's granddaughter and brooked no such thing as a no from husband or from the Prime Minister. So Monday morning I joined office. The cabinet note to make sure that that appointment was regular happened a month later. So I got my salary 2 months later. But it's okay, I was in a job. Similarly, when I quit government and joined the private sector, again I joined where a woman was the boss. But it ensured great bliss. She would open the bottle of wine at about 12:45 because it was time for lunch. And at lunch, no. She was a very refined lady, and the rest of the staff were all women. I was the token male there, besides her husband, who was a Sardar, who also believed that it was time to start drinking at about 10 to 1. But I saw that in both these cases, the women had grabbed the power. They were instructing their husbands. And there was no sense of awkwardness or oddity about this. I was blessed. So I was exposed to this very early. It has PR value also, because both of them were selling those aspects of that as aspects of their power. So if you are in an organization or you are running a campaign for somebody, you got to do that yourself. Don't wait for somebody else to tell you that this is a good thing. And if I were to take home one message from all of what we are discussing, it is that this inflection point has happened some time ago. As Ritesh was saying, when the Panchayat Raj legislation took place, and I remember when that took place, talking to the women MPs and the male MPs and what it implied, and they spoke exactly the same thing, that we will send these women and their husbands and son-in-laws will run it for us, don't worry, okay, is what the men on the panel were telling me at that time. But as things have changed, times have changed, and today I think that allyship time has passed. It's I think past its sell by date. Now grab it, run, and run as fast as you can. The men are going to now, in fact, I think Nikhil mentioned that in passing about some things. The men are going to have to run to keep up with the change. That's a good thing, because A, they are quite capable of running. 2, there's going to be a skirmish, but all of you better start running much faster, because that skirmish is coming. And you can already see the signs of that and the red flags on that issue. And if you're not seeing that, you're choosing not to see it. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much for that. I think a good way to sort of think about the conversation, though something that we were just talking about before we came here. If men are controlling positions of power that are gatekeepers in some way, while yes, women should try and snatch that power, how do you do it without allyship? Would it not then lead to inordinate conflict? And is there a role that allyship can play in reducing the amount of conflict or the violence that may come with potentially grabbing that? And in fact, a linked question to it, and any of you can comment, is that even when you give examples of political parties, trying to do more for women, how are you being able to sell it to them? What is the real incentive? Why are they suddenly now trying to open gates for women when there were no women in power in those positions where these decisions were being taken?
Just one sentence, and then I'm going to ask the people in real politics to answer. One is that you've suddenly seen that the woman vote acts differently. Yeah. That's one reason. So take that also as a sign of grabbing power. If you don't inspire the women to go out there and vote in a particular way, I remember the time when my very dear friend Renuka Chaudhary wrote that tractor to the gates of Parliament. Okay, meaning it's a long time ago. It was one of the earlier farmer protests or something like that. Okay, She's never. Yeah. When you could actually ride a tractor to Parliament House, yeah. Yeah. So now, of course, in these nicely sanitized times, you can't do any of this. But there are still spaces where you can do these things. So do it. I'm going to stop here. I said one sentence.
So, you know, when you said that, how is it that women, you know, when Dilip mentioned that you have to grab it, you look at women politicians today, starting from Mayawati ji, starting from Mamata Banerjee, and I'm not going to talk about Indira ji because obviously there is a class thing there. But when it comes to Mayawati ji or Mamata Banerjee ji, you will notice that these women have fought for their position and place in society. And that hasn't come with the traditional thought process of the Indian woman or Bharatiya Nari. You know, they have gone beyond it, and they are the angry young women of our times. And even now in politics, if you see the bigger names, you know, Priyanka Chaturvedi, Mawa Moitra, and yeah, they have to go in there and really fight for their space, and so much so that they're strong enough to get up on the floor of Parliament, and I wouldn't say it, and use unparliamentary language to grab attention and to be there. And that goes, you look at Adharaniya Smriti Irani ji, you know, these are people that have, from acting in Saas Kabhi Bahu Thi and having this image and everything, and to coming and becoming, you know, the Women Welfare Minister or Child Women Welfare Minister. These are, and beating Rahul Gandhi. You know, that requires a certain grit and force and power, and to make men fear them in many ways. That are inko kuch bolenge abhi beizat kar degi, you know, aram se. So that's, I think that's what I understand from what Dilip ji says, that you have to go out and grab it, and at least in the political space, you know, you just don't have to be smart and savvy, but you actually have to be fearless and strong and aggressive. And I think that stands for men also. I mean, you have to be aggressive and be polarized and all of that stuff. But with women, it seems, and even then, you see very few women that have come up and taken the space.
In fact, just adding to that, I agree with you. However, you know, the kind of toll and personal toll it takes to sort of push that hard, and I know there are certain people here, and Avni, maybe you can come in as somebody who's trying to open the space for herself in a political this thing. It's not that easy to, you want to grab it, you want to be assertive, but how many people will really be able to do it? And that is also going to be a very slow process, right? So, Avni, I don't know, do you want to come in?
Yeah, no, so just one pitch I wanted to make it later, but I just want to take that question and just take 1 minute by the watch and say this. We know that all of you four here are champions of equality and women's rights, which is why we've invited you all. But I also want to say that in the spaces where you are, especially to both of you, would you push it in the party enough? I mean, just for declaration, I am a Congress person, and I cannot think of another party to be a woman and do my kind of politics. But I'm not wearing my political hat on. I'm just saying that, for example, would we push to see why aren't there enough women in the room? For example, would we see that even, like, for example, you were an MLA, right? I'm sure that women also want to come and talk to you, which are things which are informal. Men would just sit around your office. Women would have to seek permission. We never just get those informal spaces where we could have the real conversation with you. We're always asking for permission. I remember in a rally, in a big rally, there was a leader. I wanted to go and see him. It was thousands of people. It took me 30 minutes to reach from where I'm standing to reach there, because men just would not go away. And there were people fingering asses at my ass, and I didn't know if I should turn back and look at who did this, and to raise that issue. And then even before I begun my politics, to say, oh, ye to bahut women rights ki baat karti hai, to address it. So just talking about us is really difficult. And a final point on that, sometimes in positions of power, men think that let me put women together, without also understanding that role as a father, brother, guardian, the dynamics that plays out in the family, that if you have too few women in your organizations, please see whether the women are actually keeping other women from coming in. Are they gatekeeping? For example, I might be, I mean, Krishna sir has given me the platform, for which is why I am a Congress spokesperson today. But if he sees that I'm actually keeping other women from entering, then that also needs to be checked. Because sometimes these very few women in the room might also become, that's also a role we want you to play as allies. So I'm just saying allies is just not about you talking about women. It's also about you understanding the dynamics and where we are coming and pushing for us and saying things that we are not in a position to say, at least not right now. So we are willing to put the fight, but we are saying this dynamics needs to be understood and the complexity of it.
Thanks. I think there are two aspects to it. One is how competitive you need to be, or how strong you need to be, or how aggressive you need to be as an individual. And that's a choice that each one of you can make and to a large extent can control. But the bigger limitation here is the unlevel playing field, culturally to begin with, socially, politically, professionally, and in every which way. And I think that is where men as allies matter. So if I think about this, if we were to get women's participation in politics to fly, literally fly, right? I mean, right now it's crawling. I look at it as a plane which has two engines. One is women and one is the men. I don't think the plane can take off systemically if just one engine is firing, no matter if it's firing away at its maximum. Maybe once it takes off, it can cruise with one engine, but to take off, in my limited experience, I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen unless the men also start firing with their engine. Now, we do have a Mamata Banerjee, we do have a Mayawati, we've had a Jayalalitha. But if we did not have the Panchayati Raj Act reserving seats for women, I can guarantee you even today we would not have even 10% sarpanchas who were women. Now that's a classic example of where men came in as allies and made a difference. Similarly, if the women's reservation bill that we're talking about has to see the day of light, it does require men as allies because, as Rohit said, in today's world, they unfortunately control most of the levers, positions, gates to policy and power. And there is absolutely no doubt that to reduce the systemic unlevel playing field, men have a role to play. So in our organization, for example, one of the things that I specifically say, that it is the man's responsibility, or the men in this room, it is your responsibility first and foremost to bring in more women. Because every time we have this conversation, what tended to happen was they would look at the women next to them and say, "Haan, karna chahiye, aap karo." This is typically what used to happen. And it has limited results. So then what we started doing is we said, first, it's the men's responsibility to bring in more women. You can seek women's help in doing it. Women are doing what they're doing anyway. One thing that we found helpful is when we start attaching incentives to their political progress, which are based on women's inclusion, women's representations, women's promotions. That's the one thing. Okay. Is this better? Is this better? So that's one of the things that we find has moved the needle faster than most other initiatives. So for example, promotions is a big thing in our organization, right? Everybody wants to move from block to district, district to state, state to national. So we've been talking for a long time about giving 33% women's representation at different levels. At the national level, we've managed to push it through. At the state, district, we're struggling. So now what we've done is, any promotion list that comes to me, I say, where are the women in this list? I will not pass this list until you include women. So what tends to happen is, overnight, they will add whatever women they need to add. Yes, that is overnight, but it brings 10 women or 33 women into that room on that table. And they go out and talk, or they go out and bring more women. So these are some things that we find are helpful in moving the needle. But the moot point is, yes, I think to have a more friendly system, we do need men as allies, and there are men as allies, and we should work together.
Dilip sir, can I come back to you on the provocative thing that you had said, which is the examples also that were given here, Jayalalitha, Mamata Banerjee, others, Mayawati. Correct me if my understanding of history is wrong, but they also had men allies that helped them open the space, and then they expanded it widely. So while yes, we need to sort of fight harder to expand the space, would you discount the importance of having an ally on the other side?
Not at all. I would actually endorse it very strongly. When I said grab it with both hands, is the men who are supporting you would also like you to see, like to see you push harder on the men who are reluctant to change. So that helps that allyship even more. Meaning, there's no point, standing in the loo and, practicing your resting bitch face. You need to put it in action with the men who are standing in the way of the man who is your ally. And that is the help they will warmly receive, and it will help your case a lot more. So, my point was it was to begin the conversation provocative, but I totally understand where he's coming from, and I buy that. And I think the only things that we have to be a little more careful about is that when caste and class come into play, especially given the levels of education, etc., the disenfranchisement is much more, and you need to give a little leeway, extra leeway, because the person happens to be a woman, and because he sees on the list that there are not enough of them on the promotion list. That's where I think you need to go and grab it and say, hey, why does this list have no women? That's what I meant.
Let me just ask one last question, and I'll open it to the audience because I do send some questions there. Nikhil, I wanted to come to you, especially because you also work a lot with young people, right? Do you see a difference in allyship across age groups as you've done your interaction, and even your work across cities, etc., the bigger cities and the smaller cities? Do you think there is any kind of a narrative flip that's happening in some age groups?
To be honest, not much, and I feel like that's where I think differ with what and I feel like I also am in a very different space than the political space that you all occupy, which I often think obviously sometimes ends up being a zero-sum game. But in the in the media industry or some of the creative arts, it doesn't necessarily have to be zero-sum game. And I feel like, and I'll start by saying up top that I think that we have, as a society, put almost too much of a burden on women having to be that aggressive, on women having to take that emotional burden of pushing themselves forward. There are already too many obstacles, and I feel like it's unfair at this point of time to say, "Acha aur karo," kitna kar liya hai, matlab aur kitna, and it is, I think, time that, and where allyship should also come in. And again, I'm saying, I feel like I don't understand politics enough to kind of comment on everything that's been said over here. But I can say that, sociologically or societally, because a lot of my work actually is in campus spaces. I've been to about 180 campuses in the country. I've met about 15,000-20,000 young people on ground. And I know that women are exhausted. I know young women, the number one issue that young women across the country are talking about, even today, is sexual harassment. In any space you go to arts colleges, you go to engineering colleges, you go to law colleges. Arts might be still a little bit lesser, and that is because they're being taught about sociology or society, but any place which is non-arts is almost entirely male-led and male-dominated, and the women over there, even if there are enough and more women, they do face harassment on a daily basis. On the other hand, when you speak about men and you ask men what is the number one issue they go through, after you kind of dig deep, because the first 2-3 answers are always defense mechanism, they're always jokes and about my biggest issue is ki ladki chhod ke chali gayi. It's always like those things. But then when you try to kind of push deeper and try to get real answers from them, the answers eventually end up being isolation. It ends up being loneliness. It ends up being, I don't have anybody who's ever given me a hug in my life. I don't have anyone who's ever shown empathy to me in my life. Said I love you to me. My parents have never said I love you to me. You hear these young people being so isolated and not having communities that they can belong to, where they can feel safe enough to talk about their feelings. Because men, we constantly tell men to be strong, to be strong. You are the, and it's all about that patriarchal power that we are trying to establish, right? And unfortunately, what is happening as a consequence of that is that these men are, the loneliness turns into anger, the anger turns into violence. The violence can, be sometimes upon themselves, or sometimes it can be upon society, and more often than not, it is on women. So in fact, what I'm seeing in the last 5 years, the trend is actually worrying me a lot more. That the trend has gone opposite, where women are now being a lot more empathetic about men and are kind of being like, oh, we understand, men also have emotion. Men on the other side are saying, oh, we are so much more isolated today because women don't care about us, and that women are the villain. So I don't have something very hopeful to say about that, because that it worries me. Genuinely, anytime I go on campus spaces, the amount of times the words Andrew Tate has spoken, it blows my mind, like what is happening over here. And that's also one of the reasons when we started by speaking about stories, we need to change the narrative. What is the opposite of toxic masculinity? It's male vulnerability. What is the opposite of, again, we always talk about identity in those terms, we talk about ideologies in those terms, but we don't give the alternate, and the alternate is male sensitivity, and that's where allyship comes in. And I feel like it's not my place or my right to tell women what you should be doing or what you should not be doing. They're doing enough, and and they've done enough. I think it as a if I have to be an ally, or for that matter, if I have to be, my place in society has to be as a man telling other men that what can we do, not only for the women in our lives, but also for ourselves. And why you talked about incentives earlier. The incentive of male vulnerabilities, you also get to, again, I go back to the same example, which I started with. That my father wasn't around. Would he have wanted to be around? I think he would have liked to be. I didn't get the love of my father, but also my father missed out on getting love from me. He missed out on giving love to me. And I feel like so many of our fathers missed out on that. And I feel like that's a tragedy, that where we obviously give the due respect that, maternity leaves. We've discussed this in the past. We give due respect to women's bodies and women's labor in giving birth, and give them, 6 to 9 months of maternity leave. We ask men that, 2 weeks ke baad tum jao. What we are really, go back to work. What we are really saying over there is that fatherhood is not important at all. Forget not just fatherhood. You don't even need to be there with your partner who has now given a birth. They have gone through like a massive thing in their body. You don't need to be around for them. You don't need to be around for your child. They will take care of each other. You go and earn, or you go and work. And immediately, 9 months anyway, the baby is inside, mother, and there is a bond there. And any other bond that the father could have formed after the boy, girl, child is born, in my case a boy, the father is, now you're taking that away also, by saying that you don't need to be around for it. So, and that's a government, like our government and our society does not allow for it. And it's across internationally also, except for a few corporates which give equal, or at least a lot more paternity leaves than others. Most societies in our world at this point of time don't care enough about paternity leaves. At the start of the birth of a child, you are taking the right away from a father to have empathy or to care about a child and an offspring. And I'm saying that's where it all starts from. And that leads to, I do this experiment in campuses. I'm going to end with this. I do this experiment in campuses where I go across and I ask two questions if you say the word mother, what is the first word that comes to your mind? Can anyone guess what that word is? First, if I say mother, what is the word? Love. Absolutely. Love is that word that comes to mind everywhere. Father, batao. If I say father, what is the word that comes to mind? I mean, it's close, but
Authority.
it's anger.
Yeah.
It's anger. And it's across. I've gone to north, south, east, west, northeast, kahin bhi jao aap, central India. It is love, anger, love, anger, love, anger. Can you imagine what a society we're living in? You know, if the first understanding of any child, of a man in their lives, the first man in their lives is the father. And their first understanding is anger, and the first woman in their life is love. And that's also why men have often put that burden of empathy on women. That मेरी mother ने मुझे love दिया है, and only मेरी माँ or a woman entity has given me love. So I also need love from all the women in my life. Whereas I have seen the anger. So I mean, anger is what I will do. And I think that's those are the things that we need to break out of, and that's why when going back to my show, I think that's one of the things that we try to do when I created the show, was that I think so many boys tell me that we are lonely, but they're not talking to each other. सेम कैंपस में 4 लड़के आके मुझे बोल रहे हैं मेरे पास कोई है नहीं बात करने को. मैं कहा तुम 4 बुक बोल रहे हो, तुम्हारे पास आपस में भी नहीं बात कर रहे, क्या हो रहा है यहाँ पर? But answer ये उनको आता ही नहीं कैसे करना. I always say that men can go to war for each other, they can't cry in front of each other. Have you seen a man can go up to a woman and say, can you hold me when you when you're going through something? I can go to a female friend and say, I would need to be held, and you can have that. But you can't go to a male friend and say, I need to be held. For some reason that seems like, oh, I can't do that. क्यों? But दारू पियोगे तो फिर हाँ कुछ भी चलेगा. I love you, you're my favorite person in this world. दारू के बिना कुछ बोल ही नहीं पाते. And I'm saying we need to break these things. We need to normalize men being vulnerable, and that's how men can also be better allies, by giving these are the alternate stories we need in this world. This is the storytelling that we need, that ये जो patriarchal idea है कि it is, the idea of patriarchy, the idea of power, the only way it breaks is if we give alternates and we be alternates. And as men, we need to be that alternate, and women are already doing enough, according to me. I don't think they need to do more than that.
That is exactly why I want one.
Let me take the first question. You're taking questions. Yeah. Why don't you introduce yourself also very quickly and just keep your questions short, please, so that we can take
I'll
more.
try to make it short.
Can
Hi.
somebody give her a mic?
No, it's okay. I can speak louder. You all can hear me. Yeah,
But
my
maybe
name
for
is
the
just
recording.
Oh, yeah, doing very good. Okay.
What's up? Can you?
Hi, my name is Vandana, and I'm a theatre and arts based facilitator, and I work with marginalized communities in India, especially in the rural India. My question is, I think, brilliant conversation. I was really enjoying it, and thank you for addressing the burden part, because I think as a theatre of the oppressed practitioner, I think I have learned the same, that allyship is extremely important, because the burden of revolution and change always falls on the oppressed. Yeah. So allyship is extremely, extremely important. But as a person who has been working for gender for the past 7-8 years, I think that patriarchy is so deeply enrooted in our society, in our ideology, in our lives, that even after 7 years, I still find myself, having very patriarchal thoughts, very patriarchal decisions, and I'm like, oh my God, did I just say that? So definitely, I totally agree with you, and everybody, the question is to everybody, totally agree that we need to break out of that pattern, we need to break out of that patriarchal social norms. But how do we do that? How do we unlearn? That's the most difficult part, because we've been conditioned so deep. The women have been conditioned to not grab power, to keep silent. The institution of family, college, offices, all of them are patriarchal in nature. The system is patriarchal in nature. So if patriarchy is so deep rooted, how do we unlearn it? Because I find it very, very tiring. I've been reflecting, doing, working, thinking, but I still think the patriarchy is still there. So like, I know there's no shortcut, but like, what's your answer? Like, how do we do that?
This one, I think, anyone who wants to come in. Yeah.
So I don't have a holistic solution to this problem, but I can tell you how I approach it at my workplace, which is politics. I think the way I look at it is, or the way I'm trying to do things is, okay, this is where we are. I would like to go to the end of the room, but I want to take 1, 2, 3 steps forward and then worry about how to make the next steps. So to give you an example of what that translates to in actual action is, in politics, one of the biggest problems that women face is character assassination, right? Now, clearly, it has its roots in patriarchal thinking. Now, what I say in every meeting is, for example, I get a complaint saying, हाँ, वो लड़की ऐसी है, या उस लड़के के साथ रिश्ता है, तो उस लड़की को संगठन से निकालो. Remove her from the organization because she has a relationship with X person. So I'll say, so I've said this in multiple meetings, is that I will first remove the person, the male, and then I will think about the woman, because you're asking me for a certain action based on a relationship of which you want me to act only on the women, not the man, whereas if both of them are in a mutual relationship. So that sets the tone not just for those type of complaints, but also for character assassination to some extent. So what I'm trying to say is, the first step is the one that you have to take, which has the biggest hurdle, which is the biggest hurdle in your immediate context. And then you can solve for the next problem and maybe the next problem, and maybe someday we will get halfway across the room. That's how I'm trying to approach it. I'm not saying I've succeeded, but I'm trying to make progress.
So one of the things, just to answer your question, is you see, you're thinking in certain terms where you think, yeah, I have to break out of this patriarchal thought process. How did you get there? Through education, through being out in public, discussing these things. So our next generation, and this is, again, as you said, it's a slow process. You have RTE, Right to Education. Where is it taking those kids? It's taking it to, private schools, where these things, they will be mingling with a different class of people, where their families, it's okay to discuss these things and to educate them about, or sensitize them about these issues. And I think that is the biggest thing. And I think we've taken huge leaps in that. This country has been independent for 75 years. You look at, I think India would be one of the places that has the highest representation of women in the world in politics. If you look at reservation and all of these things that are provided, and the way it's been discussed, and also now with this 33% reservation, whenever it comes into practice, we are right up there. We've had more women leaders in our country than possibly anywhere else that are leading. I mean, in UP, Mayawati led, 22 crore people at the time. It's the 5th largest country in the world if it was just looked at as a population. Jay Lalita or Mamta Banerjee, and many other, with Sheila Dikshit ji. So, I'm very positive that I think things are changing. मुझे लगता है कि, ऐसे कमरों में बैठ करके, if we don't think about the strides that we've made, then we are actually, sort of bringing down a collective thinking. I think that at the end of the day, we are a democracy, and we have voted for these changes, and we are continuously voting for these changes. There used to be not a single woman at a thana in UP. 10 years ago, 15 years ago. There's at least 10 constables now. Why? Because they want to have gender sensitivity at every thana, and that's across the country. So these are very positive changes, and they're coming with education, with awareness, and through a political system. And I think that needs to be embraced. We often come out, feeling and thinking, अरे कुछ नहीं हो रहा है, कुछ नहीं हो रहा है. 75 सालों में कितना कम समय है. 75 साल पहले यहाँ महिलाएं सती हुआ करती थी. आज आप देखिए, it's a huge change, and I'm very positive, and I think these discussions that happen is very positive. And people like yourself who are going out in rural India and through art and culture, I hold a sort of a few days of natak in my constituency where I get Dalit Mahila and all of the OBC and constituents from my constituency to come and see culture. But I do it not for sensitization around anything, but just to experience culture. कि ये भी एक avenue है, अपनी कला को दिखाने का, जो हमारे समाज में इतने समय से आता है. But my point is that in no way you should think, I mean, there should be no despair कि कुछ नहीं हो रहा है. बहुत कुछ हुआ है, बदलाव की तरफ है ये देश. And in my constituency of Ambedkar Nagar, आप देखेंगे कितना कुछ परिवर्तन मैंने ज़मीनी. It's one of the most backward districts. I have 25% Dalit population in my constituency, and if you look at the upward mobility within the Dalits who have reservation as compared to Ati Pichhda Varg, and compare the two women, one has got reservation through the political system, direct reservation, but then there are other marginalized communities within the OBC community who, for various reasons, have no access because they are dominant communities within the OBC because they have more money, more upward mobility, and if you have money and political power, you have better education, and therefore you can take most of the quota to yourself. And if you're a Nishad, a Mallah, or a Rajbhar, or any one of these communities, and you are women from these communities, you don't have the same opportunity. So those policies need to get to these people. And how do we tackle those challenges? Because when we went back and we look at the time of our founding fathers providing all of these policies for women to rise up, it has worked. हमारे सामने जीता जाता example है. Slow, but 75 साल किसी भी democracy में, in any democracy, 75 years is a very limited time, and in that we have made great strides. And I think that discussions around these things are important, but we cannot ignore the changes that have happened. And I think at these platforms we need to be positive and recognize those changes as well.
And I just want to add, you're absolutely right, but in my work with young people, and I'm sure Nikhil's also, youth comes with impatience, right? And I think that is really what pushes the system forward as well, because as you grow older, you get more realistic and you realize things take time to change, but it is young people that come and poke you and will trouble you and be a pain in your ass and force you to sort of rethink some of the things that perhaps need to be thought about. Yes, let's just take one or two. Let me take two questions together, and can I ask everyone to keep answers and questions short? Yeah, why don't you go? Yes.
I'm
Person
standing.
who's raising.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
Yeah.
And then hand it over to the
sure.
lady.
So hi, my name is Ashish. As four of you are sitting here, I want to ask what is this one quality that you guys have to be the ally for females? Because what are the qualities that I should learn from you guys so that I can be an ally? Thank you.
So before you answer that, to the lady in red, do you want to sort of ask your question as well? Yeah.
Thank you everybody. I am a journalist and I also run campaigns for gender equality. My question is to Nikhil. How do you see the narrative of men's mental health also concerning with many cases of suicide and so on and so forth coming on the fore? And while there's, as a feminist, I really want a lot of gender equality, but also for both the sides. How do you look at the laws and also the narratives here? Thank you.
I'm going to pass the mic so you guys can answer that question. The first question. Let's just do these two because otherwise they'll lose the train. But please keep your answers.
So I fundamentally dislike inequality, and it's just a very core part of me. And I think in this country, in spite of all the progresses that we made, gender inequality is ridiculously at an unacceptable level.
One word you wanted, I would say opportunity. Unleash the opportunity of empowered women, and the society could move at double the pace it has.
If I'm in a rally or when I go out of my constituency, you will always find, two spaces, men on one side, women on the other. Often women sit, and although that has changed, they generally sit on the ground, but now you see that everybody gets chairs. But I like to go to the women post any rallies and meet them and speak to them and listen. So listening is one quality that I think I have.
I think it's beautifully said. I would have said listening as well, and I think the quality. Be a human, yeah. I would say, just look at each other as human beings, and I think that's important. I think my politics is. Everyone's in politics. I think my politics is empathy. I really believe that empathy is the skill that all of us need to build in ourselves, and I also feel like empathy is a privilege, and if we have it, we should share it, and we should include people versus shutting out people. I feel a lot of the times that people who are empathetic and who have awareness of these issues, we are the first people to shut down other people who don't get what we already get. Our privilege, we don't recognize our privilege that, if you're constantly going to shut other people down and saying, tumhe nahi aata to tum gadhe ho, and I know more, so I don't want to talk to you, but then how will the world ever change, So that, I think that is the privilege that and it's also a burden in some ways, and it's okay. If it's our burden to bear, let's bear it. That's the only way we get a better world and we get a better society. To her question, I feel, men's mental health, unfortunately, is an issue that only comes up when something drastic happens. I don't think it's an issue that somehow, it's so interesting. Like, there are two big stories that have been happening recently. Like, there's this 80-hour work week, 90-hour work week, etc., etc. And then there is obviously the Atul Subhash case, which is another major thing that has happened. In the first one, which is 90 hours work week, nobody's talking about men's mental health. Nobody is saying mental health. Nobody is saying that. They're saying, oh, exhaustion hoga, whatever hoga. Mental health ki koi baat nahi kar raha. You don't talk about the mental stress that, overworking and burning out and exhaustion can do to you, etc. It's all about, oh, okay, you are just, they want you to, serve you, and this capitalism. No, this is a very important part to also speak about mental health issues that can come up when you overwork yourself. At the same time, the reason only mental health being spoken about in this case is because there's a woman who's, the villain, and that's just unfortunate that men only speak about mental health when, a woman is to blame. Why don't you talk about mental health at all other times? And that's where, and that's again coming back to everything that I've spoken of today. Men don't have access to or don't feel comfortable or safe enough to talk about our own feelings until there is something drastic that has happened and we need to get angry about it. Whereas I feel like we should normalize this conversation. I come from my own experience where, 8 years ago, I turned 30, I was diagnosed with clinical anxiety. I used to, and I was doing very well in my life. Like, my narrative and understanding of mental health till that time was that, and obviously ignorant understanding that mental health issues only happen to those people who are not doing well in life. And I was doing super well in life, and I still got, very terrible. I had to quit my job. I had to quit my, I took a sabbatical from my career to take care of myself. It was that bad. And I feel like that was the greatest thing that happened to me because it helped me get to therapy, and that is where a lot of my understanding of the world and of myself really began. But I feel like men should not have to break before they can start fixing themselves, right? We need to normalize this conversation. We need to have this conversation more often, and the conversation does not even need to be about mental health. It needs to be about emotion. It needs to be about vulnerability. It needs to be about sensitivity. And the more we have that, the easier it will get for other men to feel empowered to have this conversation. That's.
I know I was not asked that question, but very quickly to add to Nikhil's point, for me, I think the thing is a recognition of privilege. starting with that and an understanding of empathy. And in fact, all of YLAC programs start with that basic premise. And I think that can do wonders for not just in the context of gender, but also caste, class, and perhaps everything else. So let's just take 2 more questions in the interest of time. Why don't
Hello,
you
hi.
go ahead? Yeah, and then I'll come to you.
My name is Rohit, and my question is, how do men act as allies without taking away agency of the women leadership? If women leaders have internalized patriarchy, what can we do? This is for Rohit. Thank you.
No, I'll let someone else come in. Do you want to come in here? Yeah. Rohit asking questions to Rohit. I can answer it later, but I'll let someone else come in.
Hi, my name is Nivedita. So, I'm sorry, I have 2 questions. So, one is to Mr. Nikhil that Andrew Tate just started his own political party. So, since you mentioned Tate, like, what are your comments on that? So, since you're in the industry, do you think more people in the media with large fan bases need to get political or, have these views? Because just to sort of cut out the Andrew Tates of our own industry. And secondly, my question is to Mr. Ritesh and Mr. Krishna that there's a very common saying when it comes to election campaigning that when a man is campaigning, he can only go till the gate or the door. But when a woman is campaigning, she can go till the kitchen. This is originally said in Hindi. So do you think the discourse is becoming more men for men and women for women? Do you think that in political parties there are spaces where there's more gender balance than gender segregation? Like, do you think in a party meeting you can have like a panel like we have today, a mixed gender panel, or do you think in an all-party worker meeting you can have a mixed gender panel, talking to a mixed gender audience? Or because at this point it's very gender segregated spaces, a Mahila worker meeting and a normal party worker meeting, not called male party worker meeting. So yeah, thank you.
Sorry, before you answer that, do you want to, because you would already have just give her the mic for the last question and then I'll come to it.
Yeah. Hi everyone, I am Sajal. So if we retrospect our Indian culture, we'll see multiple examples where India was always an advocate for women. Right, we call it Bharat Mata, Mother India, while in foreign countries is the concept of fatherland. Right from independence, women had right to vote in India. We have had female prime ministers and presidents, while still there is a super 5 country who cannot have its first female president. So why is there even a need to have this conversation? Is it because we are imitating Western culture and we have idealized Western culture this much that we are forgetting our own roots?
Yeah. In no particular order, whoever wants to answer whatever question.
So to begin with your question, I think that's a very good question. We definitely a lot of these as far as women representation is in conversation. I think we have done far better. But why is it important? Is because आधी आबादी है, and आधी आबादी होनी चाहिए. The fact that it अभी भी उसमें भ्रूण हत्या जिसको हम कहते हैं, or rather abortion and all of that stuff, where people previously, more so not now, actually killed babies if they were girls, and that was because our society was male dominated and only men could succeed, and they were seen as the providers once you get old because the state is not there. But now things are changing. Women, there is enough, the government has taken steps to assure that women have their place, not just in the workspace, but also in politics, and having upward mobility. So that's why this conversation is important. And, we have to have, but it's challenging also, we have our culture, we have a particular way of functioning in society and within our families. And that too is being challenged with such, westernized ways of thinking. But is that really a wrong way of thinking? That's something that requires another debate, and we need to probably go deeper into that. It's always required and is necessary for us to have equality and to be able to choose. And that choice of what we want to become for our families and for ourselves should exist, and it shouldn't be thrust upon you to be a particular way. So that's why these conversations are important, I think.
Thank you. I'll just quickly respond to the question about different gender meetings and whether there's scope for having more mixed gender political meetings. Absolutely. Actually, I don't see the need for segregated gender meetings in political parties. While campaigning, it has to be at the comfort of the person who you want to reach out to. If that person is more comfortable with a woman, that's the way we should do it. But as far as political parties are concerned, I just don't see the need, for example, of these Mahila wings. I mean, what is that? That is just an excuse for the men to say कि भाई तुम इधर बैठो, इस कमरे में तुम्हें जो कुछ करना करो, लेकिन ये मेन कमरा पावर का है, इसमें हम तुम्हें जगह नहीं देंगे. So when I started talking about these things in the youth wing, there was a lot of pressure for me to start a youth Mahila wing. I said, no way are we going to do that. Whatever Mahilas we're going to have in the youth wing are going to be in the main youth wing. If you want me to start a different Mahila wing, then I'll have to start a different Purush youth wing. Yeah, it's just a very convenient excuse in my observation that we've started a Mahila wing. हाँ, अब महिला वहीं रहेंगी, but ये main कमरा है जहाँ पे all important decisions will be taken, लेकिन इसमें महिलाओं को जगह नहीं देंगे.
So to your question, it's very true. I've fought, and I've, like, personally, since I've started politics, about 6 elections. Rasoi tak, or to the kitchen, really it's the women that have access, and that's a big access. But men also don't really take, as soon as a woman would go to the house, they would, would be pointed and they can go into the house and chat with women and impress upon them to vote for their parties. We have also seen that previously, men would dictate who to vote for to women. But now, because this access is there, women are voting differently, either for certain promises that a particular party has made to them, or through these campaigns. So, and as far as, having separate wings and having it together, in politics, you're always lacking time. You have an election in, it'll be declared in 1 month, you'll have to go and fight an election. Before that, you sort of do your exercises where, you will have a rally, and women will need to be pulled out. We have a culture. This is India at the end of the day, or Eastern UP where I come from. Probably men don't have numbers of women to call them and be like, nahi, aapko is rally mein aana hai. You will have women who reach out. So, even political parties will have their women wing who have access to these kitchens, and they know they have their friends, or they work in the fields together. It's easier for them to rally up people that way. Also, to bring it back to communities. Upper caste community women are not going to come out to political rallies as much as, Dalit and marginalized women. They are more mobile, so to say, when it comes to rights and advocating for it and going out to a public rally. When I was in the BSP, we had Mayawati Ji used to do massive meetings in Lucknow where, hundreds of buses used to go. And most of them just on her name, a lot of women would come out and, they would take their satwa and they would take their chana and gur and, sit in the bus, go attend the rally, 50,000 people come back that evening. And, it just, and we didn't sort of mobilize them. We had to tell men who then told women within the party, and then they got them out. So I think there's nothing wrong with it. We have a culture that we have to deal with. Okay? That's our culture. Koi bhi rural India, nobody is comfortable with, somebody having their wife's number or their daughter's number or their, and it is a thing that we face. And why would you overstep a family's feelings. Although this is changing, girls are readily sharing their numbers and all of these things and are becoming part of political movements. But this is a cultural thing that needs to be overcome slowly, and it is being done so. And I think that with more participation of women in the political process and the discourse, these things will change over time.
Any comments? Okay, great. To the question that you were asking, I mean, to be honest, I don't have an answer, because it is very easy to overstep that boundary and be seen as somebody who's capturing the narrative and it is performative. Often when I have been asked, and the way I personally try to do it is that you open the door, but the person who fronts the conversation has to be that person from that community, or the person from, so you're an ally in the true sense, but you're not sort of taking away their voice. I mean, that's what I have tried to do, but I'm not sure it always works. And I mean, I know that people get accused of actually then, capturing that voice. So I don't know what the answer there is. But with that, let me close. Oh, Andrew Tate wala. Aapko karna hai,
I mean, it's a great question. I think, my answer to that, of course, is like, I hope somebody starts like a pokey party. If he started a bruv party, so that, there's an alternate. See, I very strongly believe in the creation of new stories, the creation of new narratives, to be able to break out of the old ones. The old ones will continue bothering us, they will continue burdening us, they will continue dictating our lives in a society if we do not push for and create new and better ones. I think I really do believe that our job as, every generation has to leave the society better than it found it. And मेरी जो थोड़ी दिक्कत क्या है और प्रॉब्लम क्या है कि हम ना जब कुछ खराब हो रहा होता है ना, उसके बारे में इतनी बातें करते हैं, इतनी शेयरिंग करते हैं, इतना बोलते हैं, ये खराब है, ये खराब है, ये खराब है. जब उसका ऑल्टरनेट होता है, डू वी गिव एज मच टाइम, एनर्जी, एटसेट्रा टू सपोर्ट दैट ऑल्टरनेटिव? I'll give an example, okay, very interesting example that came to me during the, last year, Animal came out, and obviously everybody was only talking about that. Very important to talk about that. It's a horrible film, very, of course, terrible, everything. Anyway, highly, extremely misogynistic, whatever. Having said that, I mean, because I had created BMN during the same year, a lot of media people called me and would ask me for quotes about Animal. And my response to that was that, I don't want to talk about Animal right now, because you know what? There's another movie that has come out, there are two other movies that have come out this year, which have actually done better than Animal, that you are not talking enough about from a feminist angle. You are saying that अगर एनिमल दुनिया देख रही है, does that mean toxic masculinity is on the rise? And I'm saying in the same year, there are two Shah Rukh Khan movies that have come out that have beaten Animal. And in the same year, in those films, Shah Rukh has been an extremely feminist portrayal as of a man. In Jawan, he has an army of women. He is women is a jailer of a women's incarcerated cell. When he meets Nayanthara for the first time, the character Nayanthara for the first time, she says that I have a child out of wedlock. Is that a problem for you? He's like, of course not. It's all your right. When he sees her, he's the one shaking. And it's cute. It's beautiful because he worships the woman. In Pathan, Deepika, when the first time. When he meets Deepika, she saves him from being killed, and he's not trying to be like, "Acha, thank you for freeing me, and now I'm going to take over." He's very happy to let her save him, even when she betrays him. Unlike other movies, unlike Animal, where imagine the two differences, right? And we don't talk about this enough. Animal ke andar, one character betrays this guy's Ranveer's character, and she says, "Lick my shoe." Deepika betrays him in that, and he tells his team, no, we have to treat her right. We cannot treat her badly, and that is why don't we talk about that enough? We don't talk about that enough. Not enough people are, sharing that and saying, ये देखो इसने कितना अच्छा portrayal किया है. But बकवास बातों करने में इतना share करते हैं, इतनी बातें करते हैं, और मुझे इतनी खुंदक आती है उस बात से, we really need to now change the narrative. Let's share the good stuff, the alternate stories, the alternate narratives much more than we share the ridiculous ones. Because the more you share it also, the more true it becomes. You're also making that part of the universe by constantly sharing that garbage. It's garbage, and you're spreading it. Don't spread the garbage. Spread the stuff that is incredible. Spread the stuff that is inspiring to you, that gives you, gives you faith, that gives you hope, that gives you, makes you feel like you're part of a better world. And of course, create that better world, and that's create those narratives. That's even further and better.
As someone who works in tech policy, I will also put the blame on social media algorithms. But let me close the conversation now. I just want to say thank you so much. I think it's been absolutely fantastic listening to everyone, and also all the conversations and the questions that came from there. I just want to end by saying that I think some outside in the normal world, gender equality conversations can sometimes feel like a family WhatsApp group, right? Where there are a few activists and a few sensible people crying their throat hoarse, and rest others just doing a thumbs up emoji. Imagine a world where men in power are the occasional uncle who will give a very profound and supportive comment, and more than just a good morning message. I think that's the kind of allyship we need: active, intentional, and perhaps without typos. So.
Thank you so much. As a token of our gratitude, we have a few gifts for you. Before we do that, I also want to introduce Pragya here. She's an artist and an art advocate, and the founder of Kala Gehan, who has personally painted some of these paintings for you. So I wanted to present you with the gift. So maybe you want to go with Nikhil. Can I also request Pradeep, Aditi, and Reena, and Lariba and Chahat to go to Arushi, please? So then you can also present the gift. So she's personally painted all of these for you.
One alternate to the Andrew Tate party could be the Nikhil Taneja party.
Yeah, I would vote for that. Come.
You should do with politicians.
Yeah. Yeah. Can we have one with Ritesh sir, please? Can we have Dilip sir's portrait, please? And then Krishna's sir's portrait. Sorry, Rohit, you're the moderator. We have not given, that's the job of the moderator. But can I also request Kanchi Navni to join us for the photo, maybe? All of you come. Can I have the cohort, like people, please?